Night settled gently over Dallas, not with sirens or shouting, but with a hush that felt deliberate. The city in the early 1950s was learning how to keep its secrets. Neon lights flickered on storefronts along Main Street, casting soft reflections onto polished sidewalks, while far from downtown, quiet neighborhoods rested beneath wide Texas skies. Dallas was growing fast, too fast for its own comfort, and whenever a city grows that quickly, power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it moves only when necessary. In a modest house away from attention, a man sat at a plain wooden table, sipping coffee that had gone cold. He did not rush. He never did. His voice was low when he spoke, measured when he gave instructions, and calm even when circumstances demanded urgency. This was Joseph Civello, though most people in Dallas never spoke his name aloud. Those who did tended to lower their voices, as if the walls themselves might be listening. Civello had learned long ago that noise attracted trouble. He wasn't born into luxury or prominence, but into a world that demanded discipline. Raised with old world values carried across oceans, he understood hierarchy, loyalty, and patience. In Dallas, those quantities were rare and therefore valuable. The city was full of ambition, oil money, construction deals, political favors, but ambition without control always left cracks. Civello knew how to slip into those cracks and quietly widen them. Dallas in the post-war years wanted to appear clean. Publicly, it was a city of business leaders and church-owning families. Privately, it was a marketplace of influence. Contracts moved hands. Licenses appeared and disappeared. Unions shifted direction overnight. None of this happened by accident. Civello didn't need headlines to shape outcomes. He preferred back rooms, late-night conversations, and favors that didn't come due until years later. He understood timing. When soldiers returned home from war, they brought restlessness with them. Jobs were scarce for some, easy money tempting for others. Gambling rooms began operating behind storefronts that claimed to sell furniture or hardware. Dice rolled softly in basements. Cards shuffled under dim lights. Civello never ran these places directly. That was another lesson. Distance was protection. He made introductions, resolved disputes, and ensured that no one drew attention they couldn't afford. The power he built wasn't visible, but it was reliable. And in the underworld, reliability mattered more than fear. People came to Civello because they trusted that his word would hold. If he promised protection, it arrived quietly. If he promised silence, it stayed intact. If he warned someone, it was never repeated. Dallas law enforcement noticed changes but couldn't trace them. Raids failed to produce results. Informants disappeared not violently, just suddenly uninterested in talking. Civello never needed to threaten. He believed that fear burned out quickly, while obligation lasted. When he helped someone solve a problem, that person carried the debt willingly. As the 1950s unfolded, Dallas expanded outward. Highways cut through land that once held open fields. Construction contracts became more valuable than gold. Civello's influence followed the money, not the streets. He knew that controlling distribution mattered more than controlling territory. The man who decided who got work held more power than the man who stood on a corner collecting envelopes. He spent his evenings listening to union leaders frustrated by resistance, listening to businessmen who needed labor peace, listening to politicians who wanted donations without questions. Civello rarely spoke first. He let people reveal themselves. In those moments, he learned who could be trusted, who could be pressured, and who needed to be kept at arm's length. What made him dangerous wasn't cruelty, it was restraint. He avoided unnecessary conflict. Violence brought scrutiny, and scrutiny brought consequences. When disputes arose, Civello resolved them through compromise or quiet removal from opportunity. Men who caused problems simply found doors closed to them. Businesses stopped returning calls. Allies drifted away. In time, most learned to leave town. Dallas newspapers never printed his name. That was by design. Civello understood that the loudest criminals rarely lasted long. Instead, he embedded himself in routines. He attended family events. He dressed conservatively. He paid attention to appearances, because appearances shaped assumptions. A man who looked ordinary was often overlooked. Meanwhile, money moved steadily. Gambling profits flowed through layers of intermediaries. Construction kickbacks were disguised as consulting fees. Union dues funded projects that never appeared on paper. Civello didn't hoard wealth. He recycled it into influence. Every dollar had a purpose beyond itself. At night, when Dallas grew quiet, Civello often sat alone, thinking several steps ahead. He didn't dream of domination. He believed in balance. A city pushed too far, pushed back. His goal was stability, his kind of stability where no single player grew reckless enough to threaten the structure he had built. By the late 1950s, his presence was felt without being seen. Decisions across the city aligned in subtle ways. Contracts landed where expected. Disruptions smoothed themselves out. Dallas functioned efficiently beneath its polished surface. And few realized that the calm had a custodian. Civello never sought admiration. He didn't need loyalty speeches or displays of devotion. He preferred quiet acknowledgments, a nod across a room, a returned call, a favor repaid without discussion. In his world, trust was currency, and he guarded it carefully. As the city slept, unaware of the forces shaping its rhythm, Civello remained awake, alert to shifts in tone and opportunity. Power, he believed, was not something to wield, it was something to maintain. And in Dallas, maintenance required patience, discretion, and an understanding that the strongest influence often left no trace at all. The foundations were now set. Dallas had accepted him without realizing it, and once a city did that, it rarely noticed who held the keys. Morning in Dallas arrived slowly, with the sun stretching across flat streets and low buildings as if reluctant to disturb what had been arranged overnight. The city woke believing it was free to move on its own momentum, unaware of how many decisions had already been settled before the first office lights flickered on. Beneath the surface, relationships were forming that would last decades, shaped not by force, but by understanding. Joseph Civello had always believed that influence grew best in daylight, not darkness. Darkness hid mistakes. Daylight required discipline. He spent his mornings the same way, quietly, predictably. A short walk, a brief stop at a neighborhood cafe, conversations that sounded ordinary to anyone listening closely enough to hear nothing unusual at all. It was during these moments that information flowed most freely. Dallas in the late 1950s was a city negotiating its identity. It wanted to be modern, powerful, respectable. At the same time, it relied on forces it preferred not to acknowledge. Construction crews demanded steady work. Truck drivers wanted protection from interference. Labor disputes threatened deadlines. Everyone wanted progress, but no one wanted disruption. Civello positioned himself where those desires overlapped. He did not attend union halls publicly, but union leaders came to him. They arrived frustrated, their authority challenged by younger men eager to make noise. Civello listened without judgment. He understood pride. He also understood fear. He rarely offered direct solutions. Instead, he suggested patience, compromise, and timing. Problems often resolved themselves when pressure was removed from the wrong places and applied gently where it mattered most. Money continued to move quietly. Gambling operations expanded without expanding. Existing rooms ran smoother, better organized, less chaotic. Civello believed disorder attracted attention, and attention shortened lifespans. He encouraged structure, set hours, limited access, careful accounting. Anyone who ignored these expectations found themselves slowly excluded from opportunity. What separated Civello from others was his ability to remain emotionally distant. He did not mistake respect for friendship. He did not confuse loyalty with affection. In his world, relationships were defined by consistency. If someone acted predictably, they were valuable. If they acted impulsively, they became a liability. Dallas law enforcement changed leadership during these years. New faces brought new energy, but energy alone did not produce results. Investigations stalled because there was nothing obvious to investigate. No shootings, no public disputes, no visible hierarchy. Civello ensured that if a problem arose, it ended before it became visible. Behind closed doors, businessmen sought his counsel without admitting it. They spoke carefully, choosing words that allowed deniability. Civello responded in kind. He never promised outcomes, only effort. That distinction mattered. Effort implied work, not control, and control implied guilt. As highways expanded and suburbs grew, Civello's influence followed the infrastructure. Trucking routes became essential. Who delivered materials determined which projects stayed on schedule. Delays cost money. Money created leverage. Civello didn't own trucks, but he knew who did. and those people listened. At night, the city's social clubs filled with conversation and smoke. Deals were discussed in half sentences and finished with nods. Civello attended selectively. He avoided routine. Routine created patterns. Patterns could be followed. Instead, he appeared when his presence mattered most, reinforcing balance rather than dominance. Some younger figures tested boundaries. They wanted visibility. They wanted recognition. Civello allowed them space to learn. When ambition crossed into recklessness, consequences followed not immediately, but inevitably. Opportunities dried up. Allies distanced themselves. The city had a way of correcting excess without drama. Civello understood that silence was his greatest asset. He did not record information, he remembered it. He did not issue commands, he suggested outcomes. He did not seek control, he maintained order. This distinction allowed him to remain untouched while others fell under scrutiny. As the 1960s approached, national attention shifted toward larger cities. Dallas remained overlooked, and Civello preferred it that way. Being underestimated was a strategic advantage. It allowed systems to mature without interference. His operations didn't expand aggressively, they deepened. Family mattered to him, but not sentimentally. Family was stability. Stability reinforced discretion. He kept personal and professional lives separate, a boundary few ever crossed. Those who did learn that access did not equal intimacy. Power for Civello was never loud. It was the absence of conflict, the predictability of outcomes, the quiet certainty that tomorrow would resemble today. He believed chaos was a sign of poor leadership. Under his influence, Dallas remained calm, even as money and control flowed steadily beneath the surface. As the decade shifted, so did expectations. Civello sensed that new challenges would arrive with time, federal attention, shifting alliances, generational change. He did not fear these things, he prepared for them. Preparation was simply patience practiced daily. The city continued to grow, unaware of how carefully its undercurrents were being guided. And Civello remained where he always was present, listening, adjusting, never visible enough to be blamed, never absent enough to be forgotten. By the early 1960s, Dallas had learned how to breathe quietly. The city moved with confidence now, no longer unsure of its place in the country's expanding economy. Steel rows where open land once stretched, and traffic flowed along new roads that carried more than just cars. They carried influence, they carried leverage, and they carried expectations. From a distance, everything appeared orderly, but order never sustained itself without guidance. Joseph Civello understood that influence, once established, demanded constant calibration. The people around him aged, ambitions shifted, and loyalties softened with time. Power that remained static eventually weakened. Civello adapted by expanding his reach horizontally rather than vertically, ensuring no single connection could define him. He began spending more time with intermediaries, men who appeared unremarkable and spoke little. These were not leaders, but listeners. They attended meetings, remembered faces, and returned with impressions rather than details. Civello valued impressions more than facts. Facts could be distorted. Impressions revealed intent. Dallas unions grew stronger as construction surged. Large projects required coordination, and coordination required calm. Civello positioned himself as the quiet reassurance behind labor stability. When tensions rose, he didn't intervene directly. He let frustration peak just enough to exhaust itself, then allowed solutions to surface naturally. People accepted compromises more readily when they believed they had arrived at them independently. Gambling operations evolved with the city. Smaller rooms closed as larger. More discreet venues replaced them. Civello insisted on discipline, no excess, no arrogance, no publicity. The goal was consistency, not expansion. Profits increased precisely because attention did not. Political figures shifted, but relationships endured. Civello avoided aligning himself too closely with any single administration. He understood cycles. Today's ally could become tomorrow's liability. Instead, he focused on systems, permits, zoning, labor agreements that outlasted individual careers. At social gatherings, he spoke less and observed more. He noted who interrupted conversations, who waited to be acknowledged, who drank too much. These small behaviors revealed character. Civello believed that character, once revealed, rarely changed. Dallas law enforcement continued its efforts, but focus drifted elsewhere. Larger cities demanded attention. Bigger headlines pulled resources away. Civello never celebrated this. He treated it as temporary. Complacency, he believed, was more dangerous than scrutiny. He reinforced boundaries quietly. Anyone attempting to leverage his name for personal gain found doors closing. Civello did not tolerate misuse of association. Influence was effective only when invisible. As younger figures entered the scene, Civello allowed limited access. He believed mentorship required distance. Those who demonstrated patience earned trust. Those who rushed were left behind. Time filtered ambition better than confrontation ever could. At home, Civello maintained routine. Routine anchored him. It reminded him that power existed to serve stability, not ego. He believed excess weakened judgment. He avoided indulgence, preferring clarity over comfort. The national climate shifted during this period. Uncertainty spread across industries. Civello responded by tightening networks, reinforcing discretion, and reducing exposure. He preferred fewer connections with stronger reliability. Dallas remained calm, but beneath the surface, alliances adjusted. Civello guided these changes subtly, ensuring balance. He did not eliminate rivals. He neutralized imbalance. Conflict, when managed properly, could be redirected rather than destroyed. By mid-decade, his influence felt institutional rather than personal. Decisions aligned without consultation. Problems resolved themselves before reaching him. This was the ideal state. When power functioned correctly, it required minimal involvement. Civello prepared for change without naming it. He understood that no era lasted forever. His focus remained on continuity, ensuring that when attention eventually arrived, it would find nothing tangible to disrupt. The city continued its rhythm, unaware of how carefully it was being maintained. Civello remained present without being seen, engaged without being exposed. His strength lay in restraint, his success in silence. As night fell over Dallas once more, the streets glowed softly. Unaware of how many hands had shaped their calm, Civello listened, adjusted, and waited, because patience, above all else, was the currency that never lost value. The city learned to carry its weight differently as the 1960s settled in. Dallas no longer rushed to prove itself. It moved with assurance, guided by contracts that stretched years into the future and relationships that no longer required explanation. The pace slowed just enough to feel intentional, as if the city itself had learned restraint. In that measured rhythm, Joseph Civello adjusted his presence without ever altering his purpose. He reduced visibility further, delegating conversations to voices that blended easily into the background. He believed that when power became too familiar, it invited curiosity. Curiosity led to questions, and questions demanded answers that were better left unspoken. The underworld matured alongside the city. Where chaos once defined opportunity, now structure determined success. Civello favored systems that corrected themselves. He encouraged redundancy, multiple routes, layered communication, overlapping responsibilities. No single failure could expose the whole. This approach made operations slower, but slower meant safer. Labor disputes emerged with greater complexity. Large-scale projects created friction between ambition and patience. Civello responded not by choosing sides, but by reframing incentives. He understood that people fought hardest when they felt ignored. By ensuring acknowledgement, quiet recognition, subtle concessions, he reduced confrontation without appearing involved. Business leaders continued to seek stability. They wanted predictability more than profit. Civello provided predictability by ensuring disruptions remained temporary. When delays occurred, solutions followed swiftly. When disagreements surfaced, compromise arrived without spectacle. Over time, people learned that calm outcomes often followed moments of uncertainty. Law enforcement adapted as well. Methods grew more sophisticated. Surveillance improved. Civello responded by simplifying. Complexity attracted attention. Simplicity dissolved it. He encouraged fewer meetings, shorter conversations, and clearer expectation. If a message required repetition, it was unnecessary. The social fabric of Dallas changed. New money arrived. New families settled. Civello observed how newcomers behaved. Those who respected boundaries integrated smoothly. Those who challenged norms isolated themselves. The city rewarded those who understood its unspoken rules. At private gatherings, Civello rarely stayed long. He arrived late, left early, and spoke only when necessary. His presence served as reassurance rather than authority. He believed reassurance lasted longer. As national attention began to sharpen toward organized crime, Civello refined his insulation. He ensured that names remained disconnected from actions. Responsibility was diffuse, accountability abstract. This made narratives difficult to construct and allegations harder to sustain. Internally, he evaluated loyalty without sentiment. Loyalty, to him, was demonstrated through consistency, not declarations. Anyone who required validation was unreliable. Anyone who accepted silence understood the rules. Dallas continued to thrive. Infrastructure expanded. Commerce flowed. Beneath it all, Civello's influence functioned like pressure unseen. Steady, essential, he did not dominate, he balanced. At night, when the city quieted, he reflected on momentum. Momentum could be useful, but it needed control. Left unchecked, it became exposure. Civello slowed momentum deliberately, guiding it into channels that absorbed impact without noise. He never spoke of legacy. Legacy invited attention. Instead, he focused on continuity. The goal was not remembrance but endurance. As the decade progressed, change approached quietly, as it always did. Civello prepared without anticipation, knowing that preparation did not require urgency. It required discipline. Dallas slept peacefully, unaware of how carefully its calm had been preserved, and Civello remained where he always belonged, just out of sight, adjusting the balance, ensuring that silence endured. By the middle of the 1960s, Dallas had developed a confidence that no longer needed reassurance. The city moved with the ease of something that believed in its own permanence. New buildings reshaped the skyline, and the streets carried a sense of quiet expectation, as if progress itself had learned to walk softly. Growth was no longer explosive. It was deliberate. Within that steadiness, Joseph Civello refined his role even further. He understood that power, once secured, required fewer words, fewer appearances, and fewer risks. He shifted his attention from expansion to preservation, focusing on keeping existing arrangements intact rather than creating new ones. Stability in his mind was the highest form of control. The networks he had nurtured for years now functioned almost independently. Conversations happened without his involvement. Decisions aligned naturally. When something drifted out of balance, it corrected itself before becoming noticeable. Civello considered this the sign of a system working properly. When leadership became invisible, influence had reached its most effective state. Dallas business leaders rarely spoke his name, yet many structured their expectations around outcomes that consistently appeared. Delays resolved themselves, labor unrest cooled before igniting, supply chains adjusted smoothly. Civello didn't demand gratitude. He believed gratitude encouraged familiarity, and familiarity bred carelessness. He grew more selective about who could approach him. Access narrowed. Intermediaries filtered requests, allowing only matters of genuine consequence to reach him. This distance protected not just him, but the people who relied on his discretion. The fewer connections a system displayed, the fewer weaknesses it exposed. As federal attention across the country sharpened, Civello responded with patience rather than fear. He had always believed that sudden change created mistakes. He reduced visibility even further, simplifying communication and reinforcing routines. Predictability, he knew, looked harmless from the outside. The underworld adjusted its behavior accordingly. Excess disappeared. Displays of confidence softened into professionalism. Those who understood the shift adapted. Those who didn't gradually found themselves excluded. Civello did not remove people forcefully. He allowed irrelevance to do the work. At social gatherings, conversations became shorter and quieter. People spoke in generalities, avoiding details. Civello approved. Details were dangerous. Generalities preserved ambiguity, and ambiguity preserved safety. Dallas law enforcement refined its approach, but found little to pursue. Without visible conflict, investigations stalled. Civello ensured that any tension dissipated before it became measurable. He believed that the absence of evidence was not luck, but discipline. At home, Civello maintained the same routines that had anchored him for decades. He avoided excess, believing that indulgence dulled awareness. His days remained predictable, his nights quiet. He valued clarity over comfort. As younger generations entered the workforce, Civello observed their impatience. He did not oppose it. He simply did not reward it. Those who learned restraint advanced. Those who demanded speed stalled. Time, he believed, was the most reliable filter. The city's rhythm remained calm, but beneath it, constant adjustment occurred. Civello guided these shifts without announcement. His influence functioned like gravity felt, not seen. It pulled outcomes into alignment without force. By the late 1960s, his name carried weight only among those who understood the system. For everyone else, he was invisible. Civello preferred it that way. Visibility invited judgment. Invisibility preserved freedom. As night settled over Dallas once more, the city rested comfortably within structures it did not recognize. Civello listened, adjusted, and waited, knowing that patience remained his strongest ally. As the late 1960s stretched toward a close, Dallas entered a period of quiet recalibration. The city did not slow down, but it learned how to distribute its momentum more carefully. Growth continued, yet it no longer announced itself loudly. It moved through contracts, approvals, and understandings that existed long before any document was signed. Within this environment, Joseph Civello made one of the most important adjustments of his life. He began to remove himself emotionally from outcomes. He still listened. He still advised, but he no longer attached his identity to results. This separation gave him clarity. Power, he believed, weakened when it became personal. Civello noticed how the tone of conversations had changed. Where once people asked for guidance, now they sought reassurance. The difference mattered. Guidance required direction. Reassurance required presence. Civello offered presence sparingly. He wanted others to trust the system, not the man. Business leaders had learned how to anticipate stability. They structured plans with confidence that disruptions would be temporary. Civello ensured that this confidence never turned into entitlement. Entitlement bred recklessness. He reminded people quietly that order existed because it was maintained, not because it was guaranteed. The gambling economy adapted to new expectations. Smaller operations consolidated. Larger venues refined access. Civello encouraged discipline in every aspect: staff behavior, customer discretion, financial accounting. He believed that professionalism disguised intent better than secrecy ever could. Dallas law enforcement refined its techniques, but found itself chasing patterns that no longer existed. Civello had dismantled predictability long ago. He rotated routines, varied contact points, and limited exposure. The absence of repetition made surveillance meaningless. At the same time, Civello observed generational change within his own network. Older figures slowed down, preferring predictability to ambition. Younger ones pushed forward, testing boundaries. Civello allowed this tension to exist without intervening. Tension, when controlled, revealed character. Those who demonstrated patience earned opportunity. Those who demanded recognition were quietly sidelined. Civello believed that ambition needed guidance, but impatience required distance. The political climate continued to evolve. Civello avoided entanglement. He believed politics was temporary, while systems endured. He focused on mechanisms, permits, labor agreements, transportation routes that functioned regardless of who held office. At private dinners, Civello spoke less than ever. Silence had become his language. People learned to read it. A pause meant consideration. A nod meant acknowledgement. A change of subject meant refusal. He rarely needed to clarify. Dallas continued to prosper. New neighborhoods emerged. Old ones adapted. Civello watched how influence shifted geographically, adjusting his attention accordingly. Power followed infrastructure, not reputation. At home, he remained unchanged. He valued routine because routine reduced temptation. Excess dulled awareness. Awareness preserved survival. Civello believed survival was not about avoiding danger, but about understanding it early. As national attention toward organized crime intensified elsewhere, Civello resisted the urge to react. Reaction invited mistakes. He preferred anticipation. He reduced contact further, allowing intermediaries to manage operations. This distance protected everyone involved. The underworld learned to operate without spectacle. Displays of confidence were replaced by consistency. Civello approved. Consistency looked harmless. Harmlessness invited neglect. As the decade ended, Civello sensed a shift approaching, not immediately, but but inevitably. He prepared quietly, reinforcing boundaries, simplifying systems, and ensuring that no single failure could expose the whole. Dallas slept soundly, unaware of how carefully its balance was maintained. Civello remained vigilant, adjusting without urgency, knowing that the greatest strength lay in remaining unseen. The dawn of the 1970s cast a muted glow over Dallas, revealing a city that had grown without fanfare, its streets orderly, and its ambitions carefully measured. The hum of daily life, trucks on asphalt, clerks in offices, children walking to school, masked the underlying currents that kept the city moving seamlessly. Beneath the surface, decisions had been made months, even years, before anyone noticed. It was the kind of control that only patience and discretion could achieve, the kind of influence that left no mark. Joseph Civello had become a master of that subtle orchestration. While many leaders in other cities sought headlines or notoriety, Civello relied on invisibility. He had perfected the art of absence. Presence invited attention, and attention invited scrutiny. He maintained a network that functioned autonomously, quietly aligning actions and outcomes without ever requiring direct involvement. In the commercial districts, contractors moved with the rhythm of an unseen conductor. Projects started and finished on schedule. Labor disputes were rare, and when disagreements arose, they dissipated as if guided by invisible hands. Civello never inserted himself overtly. He let systems self-correct, guiding them only when necessary. The elegance of his influence was that it required no visible force. Gambling operations continued to operate under his direction, but now with stricter discipline than ever. Employees were trained in discretion and consistency, customers treated respectfully, and financial transactions carefully documented to avoid scrutiny. Civello viewed these operations not as a means to amass wealth, but as tools to maintain influence, ensuring loyalty and reliability in those connected to him. Profits were steady, silent, and reinvested strategically to reinforce the network's stability. In Dallas's political sphere, Civello maintained a careful distance. While others sought favor through flashy donations or public associations, he moved behind the veil. His influence was exercised through patterns and relationships that had been nurtured over decades. Decisions by city officials often aligned with outcomes he favored, not by direct pressure, but because he had cultivated understanding and mutual benefit. Politicians and businessmen alike came to rely on his guidance without ever acknowledging its source. He had become a student of human behavior in its most subtle forms. Conversations, pauses, glances, and silences all revealed intentions, weaknesses, or opportunities. Civello rarely spoke first, instead listening intently, letting others reveal themselves. It was this patience that allowed him to act decisively when the moment required, always in ways that appeared natural rather than orchestrated. Those who mistook the calm for weakness often learned too late that nothing about Civello was accidental. As Dallas expanded, Civello adapted with it. The city's geography of power shifted from streets and districts to systems and connections. Highways, distribution routes, and construction contracts became the veins through which influence flowed. He never sought control of territory in the traditional sense. Control came from ensuring the smooth function of essential operations, from making sure that the city itself could not move effectively without adhering to the balance he maintained. Younger associates tested boundaries, seeking visibility and influence. Civello allowed them to try, to make mistakes, to learn patience. He did not intervene immediately, understanding that lessons internalized through experience were far more effective than instructions. Those who learned restraint and observation were gradually incorporated into trusted circles. Those who demanded attention too quickly were quietly sidelined, removed from opportunity. Without confrontation, left only with the awareness that their influence had limits. Dallas law enforcement had long since learned that direct action yielded little. Investigators and detectives encountered patterns that led nowhere, trails that vanished before they could be followed. Civello had designed the system to be resilient to attention. Operations were layered, communication indirect, responsibilities shared. The absence of evidence was deliberate, the result of meticulous planning and forethought rather than luck. At home, Civello maintained a disciplined routine. Days were measured, evenings quiet. He avoided indulgence and luxury, not out of frugality but to maintain clarity. Awareness, he believed, was the greatest protection. Distraction, even comfort, could dull it. For him, vigilance was a practice, not a burden, and each quiet evening at his table or in his study reinforced that principle. Relationships in his circle were defined by behavior rather than words. Loyalty was demonstrated through consistency, reliability, and discretion. Civello did not require declarations of devotion. He required actions that confirmed understanding. Those who misstepped were rarely punished openly. Instead, opportunities dried up, and they learned that access was conditional, that influence depended on alignment with the system rather than personal connection. The city itself seemed unaware of the orchestration at work. Streets flowed, businesses thrived, disputes resolved, and commerce continued. Civello's influence was like the wind, invisible, yet essential to movement. Its presence was felt in the smooth operation of the city, in the unspoken agreement, in the way conflicts never escalated beyond what could be managed quietly. As night fell over Dallas, neon lights glimmered across the cityscape, reflecting softly off the pavements. In the stillness, Civello considered the nature of endurance. Power, he understood, was not measured by dominance but by the ability to remain effective over decades. It was the quiet hand that corrected imbalances before they became visible, the subtle force that guided outcomes without revealing its presence. He did not seek legacy or recognition. He understood that history often celebrated the loud, the visible, and the reckless, and that survival and influence required a very different approach. His satisfaction came from observing the systems he had built functioning seamlessly, from knowing that each piece moved in concert with the others, guided by subtle adjustments rather than overt commands. The 1970s had begun quietly, but Civello knew that nothing remained static forever. New generations would rise, new pressures would emerge, and the city itself would evolve. He welcomed these changes, not with anxiety, but with preparation. Influence, he knew, was maintained not by reacting, but by anticipating. Dallas would continue to prosper, unaware of the care that ensured its smooth operation, and Civello would remain at the center of that calm, ever vigilant, ever silent, the quiet power behind the city's pulse. The early 1970s brought subtle shifts to Dallas, ones that most citizens barely noticed, but which subtly altered the balance of influence. Streets and highways stretched farther, new neighborhoods appeared, and commerce became more complex. The city had grown into a quiet machine, precise and disciplined, its inner workings largely invisible to the public eye. And at the heart of that quiet orchestration sat Joseph Civello, the unseen hand shaping outcomes without attracting attention. Civello had long understood that true power did not announce itself. It moved through observation, calculation, and patience. By this point, he relied more on structures than on people. Delegates and intermediaries handled most daily matters. Contracts were reviewed and executed without him ever needing to appear. Labor disputes resolved themselves quietly, often before anyone realized intervention had even occurred. Civello's influence was invisible but absolute, woven into the rhythm of Dallas like an undetected current under calm waters. He studied human behavior with precision, noting patterns in tone, posture, and timing. Conversations held subtle clues, and Civello listened for those who revealed more than they intended. He rarely spoke first, preferring to allow others to expose their desires, their weaknesses, or their intentions. When he did speak, his words carried weight, because they were sparse, deliberate, and measured. Those who understood this approach respected it. Those who misjudged it learned restraint too late. The city's economy flourished quietly, aided in no small part by the careful orchestration behind the scenes. Construction contracts, transportation routes, and labor coordination all flowed smoothly, ensuring growth without disruption. Civello's role was never to dominate these operations visibly, but to maintain the infrastructure that allowed them to function efficiently. Where chaos had once been a tool, now calm and predictability were the instruments of influence. Gambling, still a significant source of leverage, operated with strict discipline. Employees were trained to act discreetly, finances were carefully documented, and patrons were treated with quiet respect. Civello viewed these ventures not merely as income but as mechanisms for sustaining loyalty and reinforcing networks. The operations were efficient, professional, and virtually invisible, leaving no trace for outsiders to follow. He ensured that nothing about the system called attention to itself, because exposure, even the smallest, could unravel years of careful work. Political relationships remained delicate. Civello avoided public entanglements, understanding that politics were fleeting while systems endured. He influenced outcomes indirectly, ensuring that city decisions aligned with stability rather than chaos. Politicians often believed they were acting independently, when in reality their choices had been subtly guided through networks Civello had nurtured for decades. He exercised restraint, never forcing outcomes, but instead allowing the city's natural momentum to flow in directions favorable to his vision. Younger associates continued to test boundaries, driven by ambition and curiosity. Civello did not oppose their energy, he observed it. Those who displayed patience and discernment gradually earned trust, while those who demanded attention prematurely were quietly excluded. He believed that lessons learned through experience were more enduring than lessons taught through admonition. By allowing ambition to meet boundaries, Civello cultivated a disciplined network, one that respected the quiet rules governing influence. Dallas law enforcement, despite increasingly sophisticated techniques, continued to struggle. Surveillance efforts found no patterns to follow. Investigations stalled. Civello had carefully removed predictable behavior from his operation. Routines were varied, responsibilities shared, and communication indirect. The absence of clear leads was not chance, it was design. He understood that true influence required invisibility, and invisibility required systems impervious to scrutiny. Civello maintained his personal routines with meticulous care. Each day followed a deliberate rhythm. He avoided indulgence, knowing that clarity of mind was more valuable than comfort. Evening walks, quiet meals, and periods of reflection reinforced his understanding of the world he influenced. Discipline in daily life mirrored discipline in his networks, ensuring that decisions were never made impulsively or emotionally. The city itself seemed unaware of how much of its calm depended on the work behind the scenes. Streets functioned, commerce flowed, and conflicts were resolved before they became visible. Civello's hand, though hidden, remained steady. His influence was subtle, like gravity, felt only by its effects rather than by direct observation. By mid-decade, Civello had perfected the art of anticipation. He recognized shifts in public sentiment, economic pressures, and interpersonal tensions long before they manifested. This foresight allowed him to guide outcomes without confrontation. Dallas operated efficiently not because the city was controlled overtly, but because the systems Civello shaped had been embedded seamlessly into daily life. The quiet power he maintained depended on patience, restraint, and understanding. Civello never sought recognition or legacy. He did not need accolades or visibility. His satisfaction came from knowing that the mechanisms he had built functioned flawlessly, that the city moved without disruption, and that each person within his sphere operated according to the rules of discretion and reliability. As night fell, the city exhaled. Neon lights reflected off the streets, and the hum of life continued quietly. Civello observed from a distance, noting subtle changes, adjusting networks, and ensuring that balance remained intact. His influence was steady, silent, and enduring, a force without name, a presence without appearance. Dallas slept, unaware of the careful orchestration maintaining its rhythm, and Civello remained at the center of it all, the quiet power behind the city's pulse, unseen but omnipresent. The mid-1970s brought a subtle shift to Dallas, a sense that the city was becoming larger and more complex, yet somehow still contained within the invisible boundaries that shaped its growth. Construction cranes stretched higher, new neighborhoods sprawled outward, and businesses became more intertwined than ever. To an outside observer, everything seemed natural, unforced, even inevitable. But in truth, the smooth rhythm of the city was maintained by careful orchestration, an invisible hand guiding events without ever revealing its presence. That hand belonged to Joseph Civello. By this time, Civello had perfected the balance between visibility and discretion. He had long since removed himself from direct management of daily operations, preferring to supervise from a distance, through a network of trusted intermediaries. These men were trained to observe, report, and act according to principles Civello had instilled over decades. He rarely gave instructions. Instead, he shaped outcomes by guiding behavior indirectly, ensuring that each component of the system aligned naturally with his overarching vision. Dallas had grown accustomed to stability, but Civello knew that calm was fragile. The city's prosperity depended on maintaining delicate balances between labor and management, between local officials and business leaders, between those who sought fortune and those who demanded fairness. He monitored these relationships without interfering overtly, allowing friction to resolve itself while steering tensions toward productive resolutions. Problems dissolved before they escalated, often leaving no trace of intervention. Just as Civello intended, gambling operations, once the most visible manifestation of underworld activity, had become almost entirely invisible. Employees understood the importance of discretion, customers were treated with quiet respect, and financial transactions were meticulously managed to avoid scrutiny. Civello saw these ventures not only as sources of revenue but as instruments for maintaining loyalty and influence. Profits were reinvested strategically, used to ensure that the system functioned smoothly rather than for personal extravagance. Political connections were managed with equal care. Civello never engaged in public displays of influence, knowing that any visibility could invite investigation. Instead, he nurtured relationships indirectly, ensuring that decisions favored stability and continuity. City officials often acted without realizing they were guided, trusting in their own judgment, while unknowingly aligning with the framework Civello had established over decades. This subtle control reinforced his power, without requiring confrontation or attention. Civello's understanding of human behavior had become almost instinctual. He observed patterns in speech, hesitation, and gesture, noting who could be trusted, who required distance, and who was likely to destabilize the system. Silence had become his most powerful tool. He rarely spoke first, listening instead for the truths that others revealed unintentionally. When he did intervene, it was always decisive, measured, and final. Those who misjudged his quiet demeanor soon learned the difference between patience and inaction. The city itself had become a network of systems rather than individuals. Influence flowed through infrastructure, transportation routes, construction projects, labor agreements rather than through personal visibility. Civello did not need to occupy offices or appear publicly. His impact was embedded in the mechanisms that allowed Dallas to function seamlessly. Power, for him, was measured not by fear or fame, but by the efficiency and reliability of the city's operations. Younger associates continued to test boundaries, eager for recognition and rapid advancement. Civello observed without interference. Impatience was a natural filter, revealing who could adapt to the demands of discretion and who would falter under pressure. Those who demonstrated restraint gradually earned trust, integrating themselves into the network. Those who acted recklessly found doors closing quietly around them, often without explanation, a lesson in subtle consequences that left no public trace. Law enforcement efforts had grown more sophisticated, yet Civello's operations remained largely impervious. Surveillance yielded little, because the routines he oversaw were deliberately varied. Responsibility was distributed among intermediaries, preventing patterns from forming. The absence of evidence was no accident. It was the product of decades of careful design. Civello understood that power was most secure when it could not be traced or easily understood. At home, he continued his disciplined lifestyle. Days followed a predictable rhythm, careful attention to correspondence, measured social interactions, and long periods of quiet observation. He avoided indulgence and distraction, knowing that clarity of mind was essential to navigating a complex web of influence. Routine was both anchor and tool, reinforcing the calm necessary for long-term strategy. Dallas continued to grow, yet Civello's presence remained imperceptible. Streets flowed efficiently, commerce expanded without disruption, and conflicts resolved themselves before drawing notice. His influence was like gravity, silent, unseen, yet essential to the city's operation. The success of the system depended not on intimidation, but on consistency, patience, and the careful management of human behavior. As night fell over the city, neon signs flickered to life, reflecting softly on empty streets. Civello observed from a distance, noting subtle shifts, adjusting networks, and maintaining balance. Power, he understood, was not in dominance, but in endurance. Not in visibility, but in subtlety. He had spent decades cultivating influence that operated independently of him, yet aligned with his vision. Dallas slept in apparent peace, unaware of the invisible forces shaping its rhythm, and Civello remained at the center of it, the quiet hand behind the city's seamless operation. The early 1970s had settled over Dallas like a soft fog, masking both the activity and the silence beneath it. On the surface, the city moved with the ease of a place that understood its own rhythm Traffic flowed predictably. Businesses opened and closed on schedule, and the hum of daily life continued without interruption. Yet beneath the streets, through the veins of contracts, unions, and discrete arrangements, the city was guided by a quiet force, invisible to most, but undeniable to those who knew where to look. That force was Joseph Civello, whose influence had become so seamless that it often went unnoticed even by those within its reach. Civello had learned long ago that power was most effective when it left no trace. By now, his control over the city was not exercised through command or coercion, but through careful orchestration of relationships and systems. He had removed himself from the everyday, allowing networks of trusted associates to carry out operations, maintain connections, and manage disputes. Yet every move, every decision, was informed by a deep understanding of human behavior, a skill honed over decades of observation, patience, and subtle intervention. The economy of Dallas had evolved, presenting new opportunities and new challenges. Construction projects multiplied, often overlapping in ways that could have caused friction if not managed carefully. Civello ensured that labor disputes were minimized not by force, but by guiding conversations and negotiations so that they resolved naturally. Managers and union leaders learned, often without realizing it, to anticipate the right moments for compromise and understanding. Civello's presence was felt not in authority, but in the seamless operation of systems that left outcomes aligned with his vision. Gambling, one of the city's more discreet enterprises, remained under his subtle supervision. Operations ran like clockwork, employees acted with professionalism, patrons were treated with courtesy, and all financial exchanges were meticulously monitored to avoid scrutiny. Civello viewed these ventures not only as a source of leverage, but as tools for maintaining loyalty and influence. The system operated quietly, and profits were reinvested strategically, further embedding stability within the network he had built. Excess or disorder was eliminated before it could manifest publicly, ensuring both discretion and continuity. Politics in Dallas had become more complex, yet Civello managed it with the same quiet precision. He did not seek public alliances, understanding that visibility could attract attention he did not need. Instead, he cultivated indirect influence, building relationships that guided decisions without overt intervention. City officials often acted in alignment with outcomes Civello desired, believing their choices were independent, when in reality they had been guided by the careful calibration of relationships he had maintained for decades. This invisible influence reinforced his power while minimizing risk. Civello's understanding of people had reached a point where observation alone revealed volumes. Tone of voice, hesitation, and even silence could indicate intent, ambition, or fear. He rarely needed to ask questions. The answers revealed themselves to those patient enough to notice. He spoke sparingly, only when necessary, and his words carried weight, precisely because of their rarity. Those who misinterpreted his quiet demeanor often discovered too late that it was not indecision, but deliberate calculation. Younger associates continued to test boundaries. Civello allowed them space to learn, understanding that lessons internalized through experience were far more enduring than those taught by reprimand. Impatience revealed character. Those who adapted to the system were gradually incorporated into trusted circles, while those who acted recklessly were subtly sidelined. Doors closed quietly around them, offering no confrontation, only absence, a lesson in consequence without spectacle. Law enforcement, ever more sophisticated in their methods, found little ground on which to act. Surveillance and investigation yielded dead ends, as Civello had long since eliminated predictable patterns. Communication was indirect, routines varied, and responsibilities distributed among intermediaries. The absence of evidence was intentional, a deliberate design to ensure security. Civello understood that power was most secure when it was intangible, untraceable, yet undeniably effective. At home, Civello continued his disciplined routine. Days were deliberate, evenings quiet. He avoided indulgence and distraction, favoring clarity and focus. Routine served as both a grounding force and a strategic tool, ensuring that decisions were measured, deliberate, and unaffected by impulse. Awareness, he believed, was the most valuable asset a man could cultivate, and every quiet evening reinforced it. The city itself remained unaware of the mechanisms sustaining its calm. Streets flowed, commerce prospered, and disputes resolved themselves before they grew visible. Civello's influence, though invisible, was omnipresent. It was like the air, unnoticed until absent, essential yet intangible. Those within his sphere acted in accordance with the subtle rules he had instilled. often without knowing it, and the system functioned flawlessly. By mid-decade, Civello had perfected the balance of anticipation. He detected subtle shifts in sentiment, economic pressure, and interpersonal dynamics long before they could manifest. These early warnings allowed him to guide outcomes without direct confrontation. Dallas operated efficiently, not because it was dominated, but because the systems Civello shaped had been internalized by those who ran them. Power, he believed, lay not in exertion but in the ability to remain effective without being seen. The city slept under the soft glow of streetlights and neon signs, its calm a testament to decades of careful orchestration. Civello observed quietly, making small adjustments where necessary, ensuring that the balance endured. Power, he understood, was measured not by dominance or notoriety, but by resilience and subtlety. He had spent decades cultivating influence that operated independently of his immediate presence, and Dallas moved seamlessly because of it. That evening, as the city exhaled in stillness, Civello reflected on the nature of endurance. Recognition and legacy were irrelevant. True mastery lay in the quiet ability to maintain order, guide outcomes, and influence events without leaving a trace. His satisfaction came not from admiration, but from knowing that the mechanisms he had built operated flawlessly. Dallas, with all its complexity and growth, continued to move in accordance with the invisible principles he had instilled, and Civello remained at the center, silent, patient, and unwavering, the quiet power behind the city's enduring rhythm. The mid-1970s carried a peculiar stillness over Dallas, one that was rarely remarked upon but unmistakably present to those who knew how to observe. Streets were busy, commerce thrived, yet there was a subtle rhythm beneath it all, a rhythm that dictated how people moved, how deals were conducted, and how disputes resolved themselves without attracting notice. It was the invisible structure of control that Joseph Civello had spent decades refining, and it had reached a point where the city could operate almost autonomously while still moving according to the invisible currents he maintained. Civello had long understood that the measure of influence was not in the grand gestures, but in the small adjustments that preserved balance. By now, he seldom needed to intervene directly. Trusted associates and intermediaries carried the weight of day-to-day operations, managing labor agreements, supervising construction projects, and overseeing the quiet world of gambling with precision. Each person understood their role, but it was Civello's subtle calibration that ensured the entire network functioned seamlessly. His control was invisible, yet absolute. Labor disputes remained minimal, and when disagreements arose, they were diffused naturally. Civello rarely spoke to resolve conflict directly. Instead, he guided behavior by influencing perception and expectation. Leaders learned to negotiate without confrontation, to anticipate compromise, and to respect unspoken boundaries. What looked like natural resolution was, in fact, a result of decades of conditioning, carefully instilling patience and respect for the system. Gambling operations, still a vital part of Civello's network, had become models of discipline. Employees acted with quiet professionalism, and patrons were treated respectfully. Financial oversight was meticulous, leaving no trace for authorities or competitors. Profits were strategically reinvested to maintain loyalty, ensure reliability, and reinforce the underlying infrastructure. Civello viewed these enterprises not as mere money-making ventures, but as tools to uphold stability across multiple networks, a tangible reinforcement of influence in a city that functioned mostly through invisible mechanisms. Political influence, too, had evolved under Civello's hand. He had no interest in public office or visible alliances. Instead, he cultivated indirect relationships, guiding decisions through subtle channels. City officials and business leaders often acted in ways that seemed autonomous, yet aligned with the outcomes Civello favored. He understood that true power was not in commanding obedience, but in shaping context so effectively that compliance appeared voluntary. Civello's mastery of human observation had become instinctual. He noted the smallest behaviors, how someone paused before answering, how tone shifted with stress, or how unspoken gestures revealed intent. He spoke sparingly, and when he did, his words carried precision and finality. Silence was his greatest tool, and patience his greatest weapon. Those who underestimated him because of his quiet demeanor learned too late that deliberation often outweighed action. As Dallas expanded, The geography of power shifted from visible territories to invisible systems. Control was no longer about holding specific locations or demonstrating dominance. It was about ensuring that the city's essential functions, transportation, construction, commerce, labor, moved smoothly and predictably. Civello's influence existed in the coordination, in the alignment, in the quiet management of outcomes. The city ran efficiently not because of fear or overt control, but because of the infrastructure of influence he had built. Younger associates tested boundaries continually, but Civello did not confront them directly. Impatience revealed character, and he allowed lessons to unfold naturally. Those who demonstrated restraint, insight, and adaptability were gradually incorporated into the trusted inner circle. Those who acted recklessly were quietly removed from access to opportunities. Doors closed subtly, consequences arrived without spectacle, and the system preserved its integrity without external noise. Law enforcement, despite advancements in techniques and surveillance, continued to struggle in Dallas. Civello's routines were deliberately variable. Responsibilities were distributed and communication was indirect. Predictable patterns were eliminated. Investigators found only fragmented glimpses of activity that led nowhere. Civello understood that true security was maintained through unpredictability and the absence of visible structures to attack. At home, Civello maintained his disciplined lifestyle with unwavering commitment. He valued routine not out of monotony but because clarity and consistency sharpened judgment. Days were spent in careful observation, evenings in quiet reflection, and interactions measured with precision. He avoided indulgence and distraction, understanding that alertness and restraint were essential tools for navigating the complex network of influence he had established. Dallas continued to thrive, yet the city itself remained unaware of how much of its smooth functioning depended on Civello's silent orchestration. Streets flowed efficiently, businesses prospered, and disputes resolved themselves without notice. Civello's hand, though unseen, guided these outcomes like a subtle current beneath calm waters. His power was most effective because it required no recognition, no notoriety, only the quiet alignment of people, systems, and circumstances. By the middle of the decade, Civello's anticipation had reached a near precognitive level. He could detect shifts in economic trends, interpersonal tensions, or political pressures before they manifested fully. This foresight allowed him to guide outcomes indirectly, reinforcing stability and ensuring that the city's operations remained uninterrupted. Dallas operated with efficiency not because it was commanded, but because the structure Civello had cultivated were embedded into the very rhythm of the city. Night fell over the city, and the soft glow of streetlights and neon reflected on quiet pavements. Civello observed, adjusting networks subtly, maintaining balance with the patience of decades of experience. He knew that true power was measured not by visible dominance or acclaim, but by endurance, discretion, and subtlety. The systems he had built functioned independently, yet always aligned with his vision. Dallas slept unaware of the careful orchestration at work, and Civello remained at the center, quiet, deliberate, and unshakable, the hidden force behind the city's seamless pulse. By the mid-1970s, Dallas had settled into a rhythm that few outside the city could discern, yet everyone within its boundaries felt. Streets flowed with predictable precision, commerce moved efficiently, and the hum of daily life continued without disruption. Yet beneath the surface, the invisible structures guiding these movements remained intact, quietly maintained by the steady hand of Joseph Civello. His influence had long ceased to be about visibility or control. It was about balance, anticipation, and the seamless alignment of people, systems, and outcomes. Civello had evolved into a strategist whose greatest strength was absence. By now, he was rarely involved directly in the management of operations. Instead, he guided the network through trusted intermediaries who carried out his instructions without ever fully realizing the extent of his influence. Contracts were executed, labor negotiations handled, and gambling operations supervised with precision, all under a framework Civello had painstakingly cultivated over decades. The result was a city that functioned as if it were self-sustaining, though every movement was subtly shaped by his design. The economy of Dallas had grown more complex. Construction projects overlapped, distribution networks expanded, and labor became increasingly sophisticated. Civello understood that complexity could generate friction, and friction could lead to visibility. He mitigated this not through force, but through anticipation and subtle guidance. Disputes were often resolved before they began to escalate, compromises arranged quietly, and expectations managed with a discipline that left all parties satisfied while leaving no trace of intervention. Gambling, a critical component of Civello's influence, operated with impeccable discipline. Employees were trained to act without drawing attention, financial transactions were carefully documented and concealed, and patrons were treated with quiet respect. These ventures were not simply income generators, they were instruments for maintaining loyalty, influence, and control. By reinvesting profits strategically, Civello reinforced the system's stability, ensuring that his network remained robust and reliable, without ever needing to intervene overtly. Political relationships were handled with equal subtlety. Civello never sought recognition, favors, or public alliances. Instead, he cultivated indirect influence, guiding decisions without appearing involved. City officials, business leaders, and union representatives often believed they were acting independently, yet their decisions consistently aligned with outcomes Civello favored. He understood that true power was exercised through context, influence, and anticipation, not through visibility or force. Civello's understanding of human behavior had reached an extraordinary depth. He noted the smallest cues, the way someone hesitated, the slight shift in tone, the pauses in conversation. Observation became his primary tool. Silence, in particular, was invaluable. It revealed more than any question could. He spoke only when necessary, and when he did, his words carried precision, finality, and weight. Those who underestimated his quiet demeanor often learned too late that deliberation often carried more force than action. Younger associates continued to push boundaries, driven by ambition and the desire for recognition. Civello allowed them to do so within controlled parameters, knowing that impatience would reveal character. Those who adapted, exercised patience, and demonstrated discipline gradually earned trust and access. Those who acted recklessly or demanded immediate recognition were quietly sidelined. Opportunities closed around them without confrontation, lessons delivered subtly and without public spectacle. Law enforcement, despite evolving techniques and methods, continued to face challenges in Dallas. Civello had long eliminated predictable patterns, distributed responsibility among multiple intermediaries, and ensured communication was indirect. Investigators often encountered dead ends, fragments of activity that never coalesced into actionable intelligence. The absence of evidence was not accidental, it was the product of decades of careful design, meticulous planning, and an unwavering commitment to discretion. At home, Civello maintained a disciplined routine that reinforced both clarity and judgment. Days were structured around observation, evaluation, and reflection, while evenings were quiet, offering time to process information and plan. He avoided indulgence, understanding that focus, awareness, and restraint were essential to maintaining his network's integrity. Routine was not monotony, it was a tool, a mechanism to ensure that decisions were deliberate, precise, and effective. The city itself seemed unaware of how much of its smooth functioning relied on the hidden structures Civello maintained. Streets flowed without obstruction, businesses prospered, and disputes resolved themselves before they escalated. Civello's hand, though unseen, was steady, guiding outcomes like a current beneath calm waters. His power existed not in spectacle or intimidation, but in the quiet reliability of systems and networks he had built over decades. By the mid-1970s, Civello's capacity for anticipation had become near preternatural. He detected subtle shifts in economic pressures, interpersonal dynamics, and political sentiment long before they manifested. This foresight allowed him to maintain equilibrium, ensure outcomes aligned with his vision, and preserve stability without visible intervention. Dallas functioned efficiently not because of coercion or dominance, but because Civello had embedded the principles of influence so deeply into the city's infrastructure that they appeared natural. Night descended over the city, casting a soft glow from streetlights and neon reflections on quiet streets. Civello observed the subtle movements of the city, making minor adjustments when necessary, ensuring that balance endured. He understood that true power was measured not by dominance or fame, but by endurance, discretion, and the ability to shape outcomes without revealing oneself. The systems he had built operated independently yet aligned perfectly with his vision, allowing Dallas to thrive quietly under his unseen guidance. In that silence, Civello found satisfaction. He did not need recognition or legacy. His gratification came from the knowledge that the networks, structures, and systems he had cultivated continued to function seamlessly. The city moved according to principles he had instilled, though no one outside his inner circle realized it. Dallas slept peacefully, unaware of the careful orchestration at work, while Civello remained at the center, patient, disciplined, and unshakable, the quiet power behind the enduring rhythm of the city. The late 1970s brought a quiet evolution to Dallas. The city had grown physically and economically, yet beneath the surface, a network of influence operated with a precision that few could recognize. Streets were full, commerce was booming, and the hum of industry created the illusion of independence. But the reality was far different. The systems guiding outcomes, the subtle calibrations of loyalty, and the invisible channels of communication were all maintained by Joseph Civello, whose influence had become the backbone of the city's unseen infrastructure. Civello's approach had long been one of absence rather than interference. He no longer needed to oversee daily operations personally. Trusted intermediaries handled negotiations, business oversight, and the management of gambling operations with the discipline he had instilled over decades. Every decision, every adjustment, aligned naturally with his vision, not through command, but through expectation and learned understanding. This system allowed him to maintain influence without ever revealing himself, ensuring that outcomes were consistent, predictable, and discrete. The complexity of the city's economic activity presented potential friction points, but Civello's design prevented disruption. Construction projects overlapped seamlessly, labor negotiations resolved before conflict arose, and commerce flowed with minimal resistance. He did not intervene openly. Instead, he influenced perception, subtly adjusting incentives and guiding expectations. Disputes were managed without spectacle, compromises achieved without negotiation, and outcomes aligned with his long-term vision. Civello's power was evident only in the seamless execution of these systems, not in public displays of authority. Gambling operations, carefully monitored but largely invisible, remained a cornerstone of his network. Employees were trained to act with discretion, patrons treated with respect, and all financial activity was meticulously documented to ensure both reliability and security. Civello saw these ventures not only as a source of revenue but as a tool to reinforce loyalty and maintain the structural integrity of his influence. Profits were reinvested strategically, strengthening networks and embedding stability across multiple levels of the city's underworld. Political connections were handled with equal subtlety. Civello did not seek office, recognition, or public association. Instead, he cultivated relationships indirectly, guiding decisions without appearing involved. City officials, business leaders, and union representatives frequently acted in ways that aligned with his preferences, often unaware of the forces shaping their choices. He understood that true influence relied on context, foresight, and indirect guidance rather than visible authority or intimidation. Civello's mastery of human behavior had become a near instinctive skill. He noticed every detail, the brief hesitation before answering a question, the subtle inflection in someone's voice, the glance that conveyed unspoken meaning. Observation had become his primary tool, and silence his most effective language. He spoke sparingly, yet each word carried purpose and finality. Those who misjudged his quiet presence often discovered too late that restraint and deliberation were far more powerful than immediate action. The geography of influence in Dallas had shifted away from overt control of territory and toward the management of systems. Transportation networks, construction contracts, and labor coordination became the veins through which Civello exerted authority. Dominance was no longer demonstrated through visible presence, it was embedded in the reliability of outcomes. The city moved efficiently not because of fear, but because its systems had been carefully designed to function in alignment with Civello's vision. Younger associates continued to test boundaries, seeking visibility and influence. Civello allowed them space to learn, understanding that impatience revealed character. Those who demonstrated restraint, adaptability, and consistency gradually earned trust and access. Those who acted recklessly were quietly removed from influence, doors closing without confrontation or explanation. Lessons were delivered subtly, reinforcing discipline while preserving discretion. Law enforcement faced growing challenges in Dallas. Investigations often led to dead ends, patterns were fragmented, and routine surveillance yielded little insight. Civello had eliminated predictability, distributed responsibilities across multiple intermediaries, and ensured communication remained indirect. The absence of evidence was no accident. It was the result of careful planning, design, and decades of disciplined operation. He understood that power was most secure when it was untraceable, intangible, yet undeniably effective. At home, Civello continued his disciplined lifestyle. His days were structured around observation, assessment, and reflection, while evening remained quiet, offering time to process information and consider strategy. He avoided indulgence, valuing clarity of mind over comfort. Routine was a tool that reinforced focus, sharpened judgment, and ensured that each decision was deliberate and precise. Awareness, he believed, was the ultimate form of security, and every hour of disciplined routine strengthened it. Dallas moved seamlessly, largely unaware of the invisible framework sustaining its calm. Commerce prospered, disputes resolved quietly, and streets functioned efficiently. Civello's influence was like a subtle current beneath the city's apparent independence, felt only in its effects, never in its presence. The city's smooth operation was a testament to the systems he had built, which aligned people, infrastructure, and business into a cohesive, functioning whole. By the end of the decade, Civello's ability to anticipate change had become extraordinary. He detected shifts in economic trends, political climates, and interpersonal dynamics long before they surfaced. This foresight allowed him to adjust networks discreetly, maintain equilibrium, and ensure that outcomes reflected his long-term vision. Dallas thrived not because of overt power, but because Civello's principles were embedded within the very rhythm of the city. As night fell, the glow of streetlights and neon reflected softly across quiet pavements. Civello observed, adjusted networks subtly, and ensured that balance endured. True power, he understood, was measured not by visibility, recognition, or spectacle, but by endurance, discretion, and subtle alignment of complex systems. The structures he had built operated independently yet perfectly aligned with his intentions, allowing Dallas to function smoothly under the steady guidance of a presence few ever acknowledged. Civello's satisfaction was quiet, intangible, and complete. He sought neither recognition nor legacy. His fulfillment came from the knowledge that the networks, systems, and mechanisms he had cultivated continued to operate flawlessly. The city moved according to principles he had embedded, although most inhabitants remained unaware of their presence. Dallas slept in untroubled peace, its stability a reflection of decades of careful orchestration, while Civello remained at the center, patient, deliberate, and unwavering, the invisible force behind the city's enduring rhythm. The late 1970s brought subtle, almost imperceptible changes to the rhythm of Dallas. The city had grown in size and complexity, yet the streets moved with an almost natural flow. Businesses thrived without overt interference, and disputes seemed to resolve themselves quietly, as if guided by some unseen hand. That hand, unseen by all but those who operated within its orbit, belonged to Joseph Civello, whose influence had become the silent framework behind the city's seamless operation. Civello's power no longer relied on visibility, intimidation, or spectacle. It rested on the careful alignment of systems, the management of human behavior, and the quiet orchestration of outcomes. By now, Civello had mastered the art of influence without presence. He rarely needed to manage daily operations personally. A trusted network of intermediaries handled negotiations, monitored construction projects, supervised gambling operations, and maintained loyalty within the broader network. Every individual operated within a structure he had built, guided by rules, expectations, and subtle behavioral cues that shaped their decisions. Civello's hand was invisible, yet every action, every transaction, every resolution moved according to his vision. Dallas's economy had become more complex, with overlapping construction projects, growing transportation networks, and expanding commercial ventures. Civello understood that complexity carried the risk of friction, which could disrupt stability. He managed this not through force, but through subtle influence. Labor disputes were prevented before they escalated, negotiations resolved with a confrontation, and the alignment of business interests was maintained quietly. Each resolution appeared natural, the product of goodwill or coincidence, but it was carefully orchestrated through principles Civello had instilled over decades. Gambling operations remained essential to his influence. Employees were trained in discretion, patrons treated respectfully, and financial activities meticulously documented to avoid scrutiny. Civello considered these ventures more than income sources. They were instruments for maintaining loyalty, reinforcing networks, and ensuring stability across multiple layers of his operation. Reinvested profits strengthened infrastructure and guaranteed that key individuals remained engaged and aligned with the system. Discipline, discretion, and consistency were paramount, ensuring that every element of the operation functioned seamlessly. Political influence in Dallas had matured into a system of quiet guidance. Civello avoided public recognition, visible alliances, or direct intervention. Instead, he built relationships and cultivated understanding that guided decision-making indirectly. City officials and business leaders often acted in ways that appear autonomous, yet consistently aligned with outcomes Civello preferred. This approach allowed him to shape the city without exposure, influence without risk, and maintain control without confrontation. Civello's understanding of human behavior had become nearly instinctual. He observed subtle cues: hesitation before speaking, changes in tone, gestures that hinted at intent, and interpreted them with precision. His silence often conveyed more than words could, and when he spoke, his statements carried weight and finality. Those who misjudged his quiet demeanor discovered too late that patience and observation were more formidable than impulsive action. The geography of influence had shifted from overt control of physical territory to the management of systems. Construction projects, labor coordination, transportation networks, and commercial ventures became the conduits through which Civello exerted authority. Power was no longer about domination or fear. It resided in the reliability and predictability of outcomes. Dallas moved efficiently because its systems had been carefully designed and aligned, not because anyone outside the network realized that they were being guided. Younger associates continued to test limits, seeking visibility, recognition, and advancement. Civello observed quietly, understanding that impatience revealed character. Those who demonstrated restraint, adaptability, and foresight gradually gained trust and access to higher levels of the network. Those who acted recklessly or demanded immediate authority were quietly excluded. Doors closed without confrontation or explanation. Lessons delivered with subtlety, reinforcing discipline and discretion without public spectacle. Law enforcement, despite advanced surveillance techniques and investigative methods, remained largely ineffective against Civello's network. Predictable patterns had been eliminated, responsibilities distributed among intermediaries, and communication kept indirect. Investigators found fragmented evidence that led nowhere, dead ends that reflected not incompetence, but careful design. Civello understood that security lay in invisibility, unpredictability, the seamless integration of operations into the broader fabric of the city. At home, Civello maintained a disciplined routine that mirrored the order he expected from his network. Days were spent observing, reflecting, and assessing information, while evenings remained quiet, offering a space for strategic thought and evaluation. He avoided distraction, indulgence, and excess, recognizing that clarity of mind was crucial for navigating complex social, political, and economic networks. Routine was not simply habit. It was a tool for maintaining awareness, precision, and control. Dallas appeared oblivious to the mechanisms sustaining its calm. Streets flowed, commerce prospered, and disputes resolved themselves before they escalated. Civello's presence, though invisible, guided these outcomes like an undercurrent beneath calm waters. His power was evident only in the seamless operation of the city, not in visible force or public recognition. The reliability, efficiency, and quiet continuity of systems across the city were the true measure of his influence. By the late 1970s, Civello's anticipation had reached near preternatural levels. Subtle shifts in economic pressure, political tension, and social dynamics were detected long before they became problems. This foresight allowed him to adjust networks discreetly, maintain equilibrium, and ensure that outcomes aligned with his long-term vision. Dallas operated with efficiency and consistency not because of overt command, but because Civello's principles had been embedded into the city's infrastructure, guiding behavior, interactions, and decisions without requiring his direct intervention. As night fell, neon lights and street lamps cast a gentle glow on quiet streets. Civello observed, adjusted networks subtly, and ensured that balance was maintained. He understood that true power was measured not by public recognition, not by intimidation, but by endurance, discretion, and the quiet alignment of systems. The structures he had built functioned independently, yet aligned perfectly with his intentions, allowing Dallas to thrive silently, efficiently, and securely. Civello's satisfaction was quiet, subtle, and complete. He did not seek fame or legacy. His fulfillment came from the knowledge that the networks, systems, and mechanisms he had cultivated continued to operate flawlessly. The city moved according to principles he had instilled. Though most inhabitants were unaware of their presence, Dallas slept peacefully, stabilized by invisible forces. And Civello remained at the center, patient, deliberate, and unwavering, the quiet power behind the city's enduring rhythm. As the late 1970s gave way to the final years of the decade, Dallas had grown into a city of both opportunity and quiet complexity. The streets were alive with movement. Businesses thrived, and life appeared to follow its own natural course. Yet beneath the surface, the city was guided by invisible structures that ensured order, stability, and efficiency. At the center of this unseen orchestration was Joseph Civello, whose influence had become less about direct intervention and more about the careful management of systems, people, and outcomes. Civello had perfected the art of indirect control. He rarely needed to handle the minutiae of daily operations, instead relying on trusted intermediaries to manage negotiation, oversee construction projects, supervise gambling ventures, and maintain loyalty within his network. Each person acted in alignment with the principles he had instilled over decades. Civello's hand was invisible, yet the rhythm of the city moved according to his precise calibration. Every deal, every dispute, and every interaction followed patterns that had been subtly shaped by his foresight and discipline. The city's economic landscape had become increasingly intricate. Construction projects overlapped, commercial enterprises expanded, and transportation networks wove ever more complex connections across the city. Civello understood that complexity brought the potential for conflict, and conflict could generate attention. He mitigated these risks not through force, but through anticipation. Labor disagreements were diffused before they escalated. Negotiations were guided without confrontation, and compromise became the default outcome. Shaped by the principles Civello had embedded into the network over decades, gambling operations continued to play a central role in Civello's influence. These ventures were not merely revenue streams. They were tools to maintain loyalty, reinforce networks, and preserve stability. Employees were trained to act with discretion, financial transactions were meticulously monitored, and patrons were treated respectfully. Profits were reinvested strategically, strengthening relationships and infrastructure alike. The operations were disciplined and consistent, invisible to outsiders yet deeply integrated into the fabric of the city's social and economic systems. Political influence was handled with the same subtlety. Civello avoided public attention, recognizing that visibility invited scrutiny. Instead, he shaped outcomes indirectly, cultivating relationships and guiding decisions behind the scenes. City officials, business leaders, and union representatives often believed their actions were autonomous, yet consistently aligned with outcomes Civello had anticipated. This approach allowed him to maintain control without confrontation, coercion, or exposure, relying instead on foresight, influence, and strategic design. Civello's understanding of human behavior had become almost instinctual. He observed minute details, a pause before an answer, a shift in tone, the smallest gestures that betrayed intent. Observation paired with strategic silence was his greatest tool. Speaking only when necessary, he made every word count. Those who underestimated his quiet presence quickly discovered that power embedded in patience, foresight, and disciplined restraint. Civello understood that influence was strongest when it was invisible yet undeniable. The geography of power in Dallas had shifted from physical dominance to system management. Roads, construction, labor, commerce, all had become conduits for Civello's influence. Power was no longer measured by territory or fear, but by the seamless execution of networks. Dallas moved efficiently not because of overt control, but because the city's essential functions had been aligned to operate in harmony with the principles Civello instilled. Young associates continued to test boundaries. Civello allowed them room to learn, understanding that ambition without discipline could be destructive. Those who demonstrated restraint, adaptability, and insight earned trust, while those who acted recklessly were quietly removed from access to the network. Opportunities closed silently around them, lessons delivered without confrontation, reinforcing discipline and the value of patience without drawing attention. Law enforcement efforts, despite advancements in technology and strategy, found little traction. Civello had long eliminated predictable patterns, distributed responsibility among intermediaries, and ensured that communications remained indirect. Investigators encountered fragments of activity that led nowhere, evidence so carefully managed that attempts at prosecution often stalled before they began. Security, Civello knew, depended on unpredictability, discretion, and the seamless integration of systems that functioned independently yet harmonized perfectly with his guidance. At home, Civello's daily routine reflected the discipline that had allowed him to maintain influence for decades. Days were filled with observation, evaluation, and reflection, while evening offered quiet time to consider strategy and maintain perspective. He avoided indulgence and distraction, understanding that clarity of mind was essential for navigating networks of people and influence that spanned the city. Routine was a tool, a framework that strengthened judgment, maintained awareness, and ensured deliberate action. Dallas appeared calm, almost self-sufficient, yet its smooth operation was a reflection of Civello's unseen hand. Streets moved fluidly, businesses flourished, and conflicts were resolved quietly, often before anyone realized intervention had occurred. Civello's influence was the invisible current beneath the apparent independence of the city. His power manifested in stability, efficiency, and continuity, not in recognition or display. By the close of the decade, Civello's ability to anticipate change had become extraordinary. Shifts in economic trends, political pressures, and social dynamics were detected long before they reached public awareness. This foresight allowed him to maintain equilibrium, adjust network as necessary, and ensure outcomes aligned with his long-term vision. Dallas operated effectively not because of visible authority, but because Civello's principles were embedded within the systems that governed the city's daily life. Night fell, and the soft glow of streetlights and neon illuminated quiet streets. Civello observed, adjusting networks subtly, ensuring balance endured, and maintaining the integrity of operations. True power, he understood, was measured not by visibility or acclaim but by endurance, discretion, and the ability to guide outcomes without being seen. The structures he had built functioned independently yet always aligned with his intentions, allowing Dallas to thrive quietly, efficiently, and securely. Civello's satisfaction was both subtle and complete. He did not seek recognition or legacy. His fulfillment came from the knowledge that the city, its networks, and the systems he had cultivated continued to function flawlessly. Dallas moved according to the principles he had instilled, though most inhabitants remained unaware of them. The city slept peacefully under the steady guidance of a presence few ever recognized, while Civello remained at the center, patient, deliberate, and unwavering, the quiet, enduring power behind the rhythm of Dallas. As Dallas moved into the final years of the 1970s, the city had grown into a bustling center of commerce, construction, and culture, yet its outward vitality belied the intricate network of influence operating quietly beneath the surface. The hum of daily life, the movement of commerce, and the flow of people across streets and neighborhoods created an appearance of natural order. In reality, this order was carefully orchestrated by Joseph Civello, whose power had long evolved from overt control to the subtle management of systems, relationships, and outcomes. Civello had perfected the art of influence without direct action. He rarely intervened personally, instead relying on a network of trusted intermediaries to oversee operations, manage negotiations, supervise gambling ventures, and maintain loyalty among associates. Each individual operated according to principles instilled over decades, guidelines that governed behavior, ensured discretion, and aligned decisions with Civello's long-term vision. His influence was invisible yet omnipresent. The city moved in accordance with patterns he had designed, seamless and uninterrupted. The economic landscape of Dallas had grown increasingly complex. Overlapping construction projects, expanding commercial enterprises, and interconnected transportation networks created opportunities for friction, tension, and disruption. Civello mitigated these risks not with confrontation but with foresight. Labor disputes were diffused before they escalated, negotiations guided toward compromise, and business arrangements resolved quietly. The appearance of natural resolution masked the deliberate structure he had built, a structure in which outcomes were predictable without appearing manipulated. Gambling operations remained a core component of Civello's network. These ventures were not simply a source of revenue. They were instruments for maintaining loyalty, consolidating influence, and ensuring operational stability. Employees acted with discretion, patrons were treated respectfully, and all financial activity was meticulously documented. Profits were reinvested strategically, reinforcing networks, maintaining engagement, and embedding stability throughout the system. Discipline and consistency ensured that operations ran invisibly yet effectively, reinforcing the quiet order Civello had established. Political influence in Dallas was handled with subtle precision. Civello avoided public attention, recognition, or visible alliances, understanding that exposure could threaten the careful equilibrium he maintained. Instead, he shaped outcomes indirectly, cultivating relationships and guiding decisions without overt presence. City officials, business leaders, and union representatives often acted in alignment with his preferences, believing their actions were independent. This indirect guidance allowed Civello to maintain control, resolve conflict, and preserve influence without confrontation or public notice. Civello's understanding of human behavior had become nearly instinctual. He noticed subtleties: the slight pause before answering a question, the minor inflection in a voice, a gesture that revealed intent. Observation, combined with strategic silence, became his primary tool. Speaking only when necessary, his words carried precision, weight, and finality. Those who underestimated his quiet demeanor quickly learned that restraint and anticipation often carried more power than immediate action. Influence, Civello understood, was strongest when invisible yet undeniable. The geography of power in Dallas had shifted from territorial dominance to system management. Roads, construction, labor, and commerce were all conduits through which Civello exerted authority. Control was measured not by fear or visibility, but by the seamless function of networks he had designed. Dallas moved efficiently, not because of direct command, but because the city's essential systems were aligned to operate in harmony with his vision. Younger associates continued to test boundaries, seeking recognition and authority. Civello allowed them space to learn, understanding that ambition without discipline was dangerous. Those who demonstrated restraint, adaptability, and patience gradually earned trust, while those who acted recklessly or impulsively were quietly excluded. Opportunities closed around them without confrontation or explanation. Subtle lessons delivered through absence rather than reprimand. Law enforcement efforts, despite evolving methods, continued to face challenges in Dallas. Civello had eliminated predictable patterns, distributed responsibility across intermediaries, and ensured that communications remained indirect. Investigations often led to fragments of activity that went nowhere, leaving authorities frustrated and unable to connect the dots. Security was maintained through invisibility, unpredictability, and careful integration of operations into the broader infrastructure of the city. At home, Civello maintained a disciplined routine that mirrored the order he expected from his network. Days were spent observing, evaluating, and reflecting on patterns of behavior, commerce, and influence. Evenings offered quiet time to process information, strategize, and maintain perspective. He avoided indulgence, understanding that focus, awareness, and clarity were essential to navigate the complex networks he had built. Routine was a tool, not monotony, a framework that reinforced deliberate, precise action. Dallas, meanwhile, continued to operate smoothly, oblivious to the hidden framework sustaining its calm. Streets flowed efficiently, commerce prospered, and disputes resolved quietly before they escalated. Civello's influence was like a gentle current beneath calm waters, unseen but critical to maintaining the city's stability. His power was measured in outcomes, in the reliability of systems, and in the quiet continuity of operations, not in recognition, fear, or spectacle. By the late 1970s, Civello's foresight had reached a level of near precognition. He could detect subtle shifts in social, economic, and political dynamics long before they became evident. This ability allowed him to maintain equilibrium, adjust networks discreetly, and ensure that all outcomes aligned with his long-term vision. Dallas functioned efficiently not because of visible authority but because Civello's principles had been embedded into the very fabric of the city's operation. Night descended over Dallas, casting a soft glow across streets reflecting neon signs and creating an atmosphere of quiet continuity. Civello observed, adjusted networks subtly, and ensured that the balance he had cultivated endured. He understood that true power was not measured by visibility, recognition, or intimidation, but by endurance, discretion, and the ability to influence outcomes without revealing oneself. The systems he had built operated independently yet aligned perfectly with his vision, allowing Dallas to thrive quietly and efficiently. Civello's satisfaction was subtle yet complete. He did not seek fame, recognition, or legacy. His fulfillment came from the knowledge that the city, its systems, and its networks continued to function flawlessly under his guidance. Dallas moved according to the principles he had instilled, although most inhabitants remained unaware of the invisible forces at work. The city slept in stability, and Civello remained at the center, patient, deliberate, and unwavering. The quiet, enduring power behind the seamless rhythm of Dallas. The dawn of the 1980s approached with a quiet intensity over Dallas. The city had grown in size, ambition, and complexity, yet its outward appearance remained one of calm and order. Streets flowed with predictable rhythm, commerce thrived, and the hum of everyday life continued uninterrupted. Beneath the surface, however, a network of influence and control operated invisibly, guiding outcomes, shaping behavior, and ensuring stability. At the center of this intricate web was Joseph Civello, whose power had evolved into a precise, nearly intangible form. Civello no longer required overt displays of authority. His influence resided in the seamless orchestration of systems, networks, and human behavior, executed with patience and foresight. By this point, Civello had perfected the art of indirect management. Daily operations were delegated to a trusted circle of intermediaries, each of whom understood their role and the expectations that framed it. Labor negotiations were handled with foresight, construction projects advanced without conflict, and gambling ventures operated under strict discipline and discretion. Every action was guided by principles Civello had instilled over decades, ensuring alignment with his long-term vision. Dallas moved as if of its own accord, yet every current flowed according to his careful design. The city's economic complexity presented opportunities for friction and attention. Construction projects overlapped geographically and temporally. Commercial enterprises expanded into new markets, and the movement of labor and goods created points of potential tension. Civello mitigated these risks through anticipation rather than reaction. Disputes were diffused before they escalated, negotiations guided toward natural compromise, and outcomes were molded to prevent visible conflict. What appeared to the public as organic resolution was, in fact, the product of decades of strategic alignment, subtle influence, and the cultivation of reliable intermediaries. Gambling operations remained central to Civello's network, though their purpose extended beyond profit. These ventures served as instruments for reinforcing loyalty, consolidating influence, and maintaining the operational integrity of the network. Employees were trained to act with professionalism and discretion. Patrons were treated with courtesy, and financial oversight ensured security and consistency. Reinvested profits strengthened relationships, maintained engagement, and reinforced the underlying structure that allowed Civello's influence to extend quietly but effectively across multiple layers of Dallas society. Political influence was handled with equal subtlety. Civello avoided public attention, recognizing that visibility could attract scrutiny or disrupt equilibrium. Instead, he built relationships indirectly, creating conditions that guided decisions without revealing his hand. City officials, business leaders, and union representatives often acted in ways that appeared autonomous, yet consistently aligned with outcomes Civello had anticipated. This approach allowed him to maintain control without confrontation or coercion, relying on foresight, observation, and the careful management of incentives rather than overt authority. Civello's mastery of human behavior had become nearly instinctual. He noted subtle cues, hesitation before responding, the smallest changes in tone, a fleeting gesture that betrayed intent. Observation, coupled with deliberate silence, became his most powerful tools. When he did speak, His words carried weight and finality, commanding attention through rarity rather than volume. Those who underestimated him because of his quiet demeanor often discovered too late that patience, anticipation, and strategic restraint were far more formidable than impulsive action. The geography of influence had shifted from visible territorial control to system management. Construction networks, labor coordination, commercial enterprises, and transportation all became channels through which Civello exerted authority. Dominance was measured not by fear or spectacle, but by the seamless execution of operations that aligned with his vision. Dallas functioned efficiently, not through command, but through the integration of systems shaped by invisible guidance. Young associates continued to test boundaries, driven by ambition and the desire for visibility. Civello allowed them to act within controlled parameters, recognizing that impatience revealed character. Those who demonstrated restraint, insight, and adaptability earned trust and access to the inner circle. Those who acted recklessly were quietly excluded, their opportunities removed without confrontation. Lessons were delivered subtly, through absence and consequence, reinforcing the principles of discipline, patience, and strategic awareness. Law enforcement faced increasing challenges as Civello operations remained meticulously insulated. Predictable patterns had been eliminated, responsibilities distributed among intermediaries, and communication kept indirect. Investigations produced fragmented evidence that rarely led to actionable conclusions. Civello understood that security was not achieved through confrontation or force, but through invisibility, unpredictability, and the disciplined alignment of networks operating within a carefully structured framework. At home, Civello adhered to a disciplined daily routine that reinforced both clarity and focus. Days were spent observing, reflecting, and evaluating patterns of behavior, commerce, and influence. Evenings offered quiet time for strategy, consideration, and the maintenance of perspective. He avoided indulgence, distraction, and excess, recognizing that sustained awareness and mental discipline were essential for managing the complex network he had cultivated. Routine was not a limitation, but a tool and instrument of clarity and precision that strengthened decision-making and judgment. Dallas continued to operate smoothly, seemingly independent, but in reality deeply shaped by Civello's invisible guidance. Streets flowed efficiently, commerce prospered, and disputes were resolved quietly before they escalated. Civello's influence was like an unseen current beneath the city's surface, subtle, essential, and effective. Power was measured not by fear or recognition, but by reliability, efficiency, and the continuity of systems he had built. By the end of the decade, Civello's foresight had reached near preternatural precision. He could anticipate shifts in economic pressures, social dynamics, and political climates before they became visible. This capacity allowed him to maintain balance, adjust networks subtly, and ensure outcomes consistently aligned with his long-term strategy. Dallas functioned efficiently not because of visible command, but because Civello's principles were embedded into the systems that governed the city's operation. Night descended across Dallas, casting neon reflections on quiet streets and illuminating the subtle order of the city. Civello observed, made small adjustments where necessary, and ensured that the balance endured. He understood that true power was not demonstrated through recognition, confrontation, or spectacle, but through endurance, discretion, and the ability to shape outcomes invisibly. The networks and structures he had built operated independently yet aligned perfectly with his intentions, allowing Dallas to thrive quietly, consistently, and securely. Civello's satisfaction was understated yet complete. He sought neither fame nor legacy. His fulfillment came from the knowledge that the city, its systems, and its networks continued to function flawlessly under his influence. Dallas moved according to principles he had embedded. Though most residents were unaware of the invisible forces guiding them, the city slept in stability and calm, and Civello remained at the center, patient, deliberate, and unwavering, the quiet, enduring force behind the seamless rhythm of Dallas. The early 1980s arrived quietly over Dallas, carrying with it both change and continuity. On the surface, the city appeared to pulse with the same steady rhythm it had for decades. Streets moved in familiar patterns, businesses thrived, and daily life proceeded uninterrupted. But beneath this apparent normalcy, a complex lasso of influence, loyalty, and subtle control continued to guide outcomes, unseen by nearly everyone. At the center of this intricate, almost invisible network remained Joseph Civello, whose quiet presence had become the stabilizing force behind the city's seamless operation. Civello's power was no longer measured by fear, recognition, or spectacle. It resided entirely in the careful orchestration of systems, people, and outcomes. By this point, Civello had perfected the art of invisible control. Daily operations were delegated to trusted associates who understood the expectations framing their roles. Labor negotiations, construction oversight, and the management of gambling operations were conducted with precision and discretion. Every interaction followed a pattern cultivated over decades. What seemed natural and effortless to outsiders was actually the result of careful planning, subtle influence, and a deep understanding of human behavior. Civello's presence was felt in the smooth functioning of the city, not in visible action. Dallas's economy had grown increasingly intricate, with multiple construction projects overlapping, commercial enterprise expanding into new markets, and transportation networks connecting neighborhoods more than ever before. Civello understood that complexity brought the risk of disruption, tension, and exposure. He mitigated these risks through foresight and subtle intervention. Disputes were prevented before they escalated. Negotiations guided toward compromise, and outcomes were shaped in ways that maintained harmony without anyone recognizing external influence. The city's calm appearance was a testament to his skill, patience, and meticulous planning. Gambling operations remained a critical instrument of Civello's influence. These ventures were not merely a source of profit, they reinforced loyalty, strengthened networks, and provided subtle control over the flow of wealth and opportunity. Employees operated with strict discipline. Patrons were treated with respect, and financial oversight ensured consistency and security. Reinvested profits maintained engagement, supported operations, and reinforced the invisible framework of authority Civello had built over decades. The operations were seamless, functional, and discreet, reflecting both efficiency and strategic foresight. Political influence was handled with the same subtle precision. Civello avoided the spotlight, understanding that visibility could compromise the systems he had cultivated. Instead, he created conditions that guided decisions indirectly. City officials, business leaders, and union representatives frequently acted in alignment with outcomes he anticipated, often unaware of the influence shaping their choices. Through foresight, observation, and strategic guidance, Civello maintained control, ensuring stability and alignment without overt interference or confrontation. Civello's understanding of human behavior had become almost instinctual. He noticed subtleties, the pause before an answer, the smallest change in tone, a glance that revealed intention, and interpreted them with precision. Observation, combined with silence, became his most effective tools. When he spoke, his words carried purpose, weight, and finality. Those who misjudged his quiet demeanor often learned, too late, that patience, insight, and strategic foresight were far more formidable than impulsive action. Influence was most potent when invisible, yet undeniably effective. The geography of power in Dallas had shifted from physical domination to systemic control. Roads, construction projects, labor coordination, commercial enterprise, all became channels through which Civello exerted authority. Power was measured not in visibility or fear, but in the seamless execution of networks and outcomes. Dallas functioned efficiently because the city systems operated in harmony with principles Civello had embedded, rather than through overt control or command. Younger associates continued to test boundaries, driven by ambition and the desire for influence. Civello allowed them to act within safe limits, recognizing that impatience revealed character. Those who demonstrated patience, adaptability, and insight earned trust and gradually entered the inner circle. Those who acted recklessly or sought immediate recognition were quietly removed from opportunities. Lessons were delivered through subtle consequence rather than confrontation, reinforcing discipline and strategic awareness. Law enforcement faced persistent challenges. Civello had long eliminated predictable patterns, distributed responsibility among intermediaries, and ensured that communication remained indirect. Investigators encountered fragmented evidence, false leads, and dead ends that made prosecution nearly impossible. Security depended on invisibility, unpredictability, and the seamless integration of systems that operated independently yet aligned with Civello's guidance. His network was resilient because it functioned without exposure, relying on foresight, observation, and meticulous discipline. At home, Civello adhered to a disciplined routine that mirrored the order he expected in his operation. Days were spent observing, analyzing, and reflecting, while evenings offered time for quiet strategy and consideration. He avoided indulgence and distraction, understanding that clarity, focus, and awareness were essential tools for managing complex networks of influence. Routine was not monotony. It was a framework that sharpened judgment, reinforced decision-making, and ensured deliberate, precise action. Dallas continued to move efficiently, appearing independent while quietly guided by Civello's unseen hand. Streets flowed smoothly, businesses prospered, and conflicts were resolved before escalation. Civello's presence was an invisible current beneath the surface, shaping outcomes without drawing attention. His power was measured not in fear, recognition, or confrontation, but in the continuity, stability, and efficiency of the systems he had built. By the early 1980s, Civello's foresight was almost preternatural. He detected subtle shifts in economic trends, social dynamics, and political pressures long before they became apparent. This capacity allowed him to adjust networks, maintain equilibrium, and ensure outcomes aligned with his long-term vision. Dallas operated efficiently not because of visible authority, but because Civello's principles had been embedded into the very framework of the city's operation. Night fell over Dallas, casting a calm, reflective glow across quiet streets. Civello observed, adjusted where necessary, and ensured that balance endured. He understood that true power was measured not in visibility, recognition, or intimidation, but in endurance, discretion, and the ability to influence outcomes invisibly. The networks and systems he had constructed operated independently, yet perfectly aligned with his intentions, allowing Dallas to thrive quietly, securely, and efficiently. Civello's satisfaction was quiet, subtle, and complete. He sought no fame, recognition, or legacy. His fulfillment came from knowing that the city, its networks, and the systems he had nurtured continued to operate flawlessly. Dallas moved according to the principles he had instilled, while most residents remained unaware of the invisible forces guiding them. The city slept in stability, and Civello remained at the center, patient, deliberate, and unwavering. The quiet, enduring power behind the seamless rhythm and invisible order of Dallas. The city of Dallas, by the early 1980s, had evolved into a complex web of streets, commerce, and communities, its outward appearance bustling and ordinary. But beneath this ordinary rhythm, an invisible current of control and influence ran through its neighborhoods, businesses, and social structures, guided by a hand that few ever saw and even fewer understood. That hand belonged to Joseph Civello, a man whose quiet presence had become the backbone of the city's underworld. For decades, he had orchestrated the movements of people, systems, and decisions with such precision that the city itself appeared almost self-regulating. It was not through force, intimidation, or spectacle that Civello maintained authority, but through careful observation, subtle guidance, and a mastery of human behavior that few could comprehend. By now, Civello had perfected a system in which influence operated invisibly. His trusted intermediaries managed day-to-day operations in gambling, construction, labor coordination, and political interactions, all working under principles he had meticulously instilled. Each associate understood the expectations, boundaries, and methods that allowed outcomes to follow his long-term vision without requiring his overt presence. The city moved according to patterns Civello had cultivated, yet residents and outsiders remained largely unaware of the silent structure underpinning every transaction, negotiation, and interaction. The scale of his influence was both impressive and almost imperceptible. Construction projects overlapped without friction, commercial enterprises expanded with minimal disruption, and labor negotiations resolved themselves almost before they began. Civello had learned early in his career that true control lay not in domination but in the alignment of interests, in the orchestration of outcomes, and in the cultivation of loyalty. He understood that people, when guided subtly and observed carefully, could be influenced to act in predictable, favorable ways without being aware of it. This method had allowed him to maintain stability and consistency over decades, far longer than many contemporaries who relied on fear or aggression. Gambling operations remained a cornerstone of his network, though their significance extended beyond profit. These ventures acted as mechanisms to ensure loyalty, sustain engagement, and reinforce the structural integrity of his organization. Employees were trained to conduct themselves with professionalism and discretion, patrons treated with respect, and financial systems monitored with exacting precision. Reinvested revenue supported the infrastructure of influence, ensuring that critical relationship remained secure and that the network could continue functioning without exposure. Civello recognized that wealth was a tool, a currency of influence as powerful as strategy or foresight. Political influence had always been handled with subtlety. Civello avoided direct visibility, understanding that the slightest hint of exposure could unravel years of careful planning. Instead, he cultivated relationships indirectly, created opportunities for others to act in alignment with his objectives, and influence decisions without apparent interference. City officials, business leaders, and union representatives often acted as though autonomous, unaware of the guiding principles shaping their choices. By relying on foresight, observation, and the strategic placement of incentives, Civello was able to maintain authority and balance without confrontation, coercion, or spectacle. Observation and understanding of human behavior were Civello's greatest tools. He could read intentions through micro-expressions, subtle pauses, or shifts in tone. Silence, for him, was a language as powerful as words, and when he did speak, every statement carried weight, clarity, and finality. Impulsive associates learned quickly that patience and strategic foresight outweighed impulsive action. Civello had cultivated an environment in which discipline, observation, and strategic thinking were not just valued but required. Loyalty was nurtured, and recklessness quietly removed from the network. The geography of influence had shifted from overt territorial control to the careful management of systems. Roads, commercial activity, construction, and labor relations were channels through which Civello maintained authority. Dallas moved efficiently not because of visible power, but because these systems had been structured to operate according to predictable principles that Civello had embedded over decades. Power was measured in reliability, order, and the invisible orchestration of outcomes rather than in intimidation or notoriety. Younger associates frequently tested boundaries driven by ambition and desire for visibility. Civello allowed them room to learn, understanding that impatience revealed true character. Those who displayed adaptability, insight, and restraint earned trust and access to higher levels of the network. Those who acted impulsively or recklessly were quietly removed from influence. Doors closed without confrontation, lessons delivered with subtlety through absence and consequence, reinforcing discipline, patience, and strategic awareness. Law enforcement faced growing frustration in their attempts to understand or penetrate Civello's network. Predictable patterns were non-existent, responsibilities were dispersed among intermediaries, and communication was indirect, leaving investigators with fragmented evidence and dead ends. Civello's system was resilient because it relied not on confrontation or force but on invisibility, foresight, and the careful alignment of human behavior and operational systems. The structure was enduring, precise, and impenetrable to those who did not understand its architecture. At home, Civello's daily routine reflected the discipline and order he expected of his network. Days were spent observing, analyzing, and reflecting on patterns of behavior, commerce, and influence, while evenings were reserved for strategy and quiet consideration. He avoided indulgence, distraction, and excess, recognizing that clarity and focus were essential tools for maintaining control. Routine was not monotony, it was a framework for observation, reflection, and deliberate decision-making, sharpening judgment and sustaining his ability to maintain influence across decades. Dallas continued to operate smoothly, appearing independent while functioning according to the principles Civello had embedded. Streets flowed, commerce prospered, and disputes resolved themselves quietly before they escalated. Civello's influence was an unseen current beneath the city's surface, subtle, essential, and omnipresent. Power was measured not in recognition, fear, or aggression, but in the reliability and continuity of the networks he had constructed. Civello's foresight had reached extraordinary levels. He could sense shifts in economic trends, social behavior, and political climates long before they manifested publicly. This preemptive awareness allowed him to adjust networks, maintain stability, and ensure that all outcomes aligned with his long-term vision. Dallas thrived not because of visible authority, but because Civello had embedded principles, systems, and methods that ensured efficiency, stability, and continuity. As night fell over the city, the glow of streetlights and neon illuminated quiet streets, reflective of the calm order Civello had cultivated. He observed, adjusted networks as necessary, and ensured the balance endured. Civello understood that true power was measured not by recognition or intimidation, but by endurance, discretion, and the ability to shape outcomes invisibly. The structures and networks he had built operated independently yet in perfect alignment with his intentions, allowing the city to function seamlessly. Joseph Civello's satisfaction was subtle but complete. He sought no fame, public recognition, or legacy in the conventional sense. His fulfillment came from knowing that the city, its systems, and the networks he had nurtured continued to operate flawlessly. Dallas moved according to principles he had instilled, while most inhabitants remained unaware of the invisible forces shaping their city. The streets remained calm, commerce thrived, disputes resolved quietly, and the rhythm of life continued uninterrupted, all under the quiet, enduring guidance of a man whose power had been measured not by the spectacle, but by invisible authority, strategic foresight, and disciplined control. In the end, Civello's legacy was not written in headlines, notoriety, or criminal infamy. It was written in the seamless functioning of Dallas itself, the reliability of outcomes, the stability of networks, and the enduring influence of a man who understood that real power lies in patience, observation, and the quiet orchestration of people and systems. Dallas slept in peace, its rhythm unbroken, guided by the invisible hand of Joseph Civello, the quiet power behind the city, a figure whose legacy endured not through visibility, but through the enduring, invisible structures he had left behind.